In this lesson we are going to discuss various marine protists. Now, members of the kingdom Protista are a diverse group of eukaryotic organisms with simple organization. Now, it's important to note that modern taxonomy has actually divided this kingdom up into different kingdoms, but so far it hasn't gained popularity in the textbooks that we use for this class. So to keep things simple for you guys, we're going to stay with the traditional kingdom Protista classification. Now, some basic characteristics of protists are that most of them are unicellular, but there are some multicellular forms, such as the seaweeds. Now, a couple of ways that kingdom Protista is divided up is to look at them as either animal-like or plant-like. Protozoans, which the word actually means first animal, is a term that refers to heterotrophic protists. These would be protists that consume things and cannot photosynthesize sugars. Now, it's important to note that they're animal-like. They're not actually animals, though, so they're not in kingdom Animalia. They're in kingdom Protista. Now, algae is a term that refers to photosynthetic protists. So they are plant-like, but again, they're not real plants. Algae, of course, are plant-like because they have chloroplasts, which are photosynthetic organelles. Notice that some of the bacteria that were photosynthetic did not have chloroplasts because they were prokaryotes. Algae, being in kingdom Protista, are eukaryotes and have organelles like chloroplasts. Seaweeds, as I mentioned before, is a term that refers to multicellular. Continuing with our discussion on seaweeds, there is a basic difference between seaweeds being protists and plants being in the kingdom Plantae because of their body form. And you can see that in the picture on this slide. On the left is the blade from a kelp. Notice there are no water-conducting vessels in that blade like you see on the leaf on the right-hand side. Algae, of course, don't need these water-conducting vessels because they already live in water. But plants that live on land need vessels that carry waters and sugars throughout the plant because they don't live within water. They have to bring it from the ground up to the leaf. But there's other things such as the types of pigments and storage products, which we'll talk more about later. Algae do have some general characteristics in their basic morphology. For example, letter A on this diagram shows the stipe, which is similar to the stem on a plant. However, it does not have xylem and phloem, which conduct water and sugar. It is basically just kind of like the main portion of the organism. Letter B is pointing to a pneumatocyst, which is a gas bladder that has the function of keeping the blades of the algae close to the surface of the water where light is. And of course, the plant needs the light for photosynthesis. Letter C shows a blade, which is a leaf-like photosynthetic organ. It's not a true leaf because it doesn't have veins like a leaf does. Letter D is pointing to the holdfast, which is similar to a root system, only again it's not going to conduct water. Its sole purpose is to attach the whole organism to the plant, hence why it's called a holdfast. In this slide we are going to start looking at the different phyla or groups of marine protists. The first two phyla we're going to look at are both protozoans. The first phylum is Radiolaria, which easy to remember, holds the radiolarians. These are heterotrophic, hence why they're protozoans. And they're interesting in that they have shells that are made of silica, which is kind of like glass. They are mostly planktonic, and when they die, they make up a biogenous sediment, in particular called a siliceous ooze. Now, phylum Foraminifera includes the forams, which you can see pictured there on the right. Again, they're also heterotrophic, and their shell is actually called a test and is made of calcium carbonate. So these tend to live closer to the bottom, but of course when they die they're still going to make up sediments, and because they are mostly made of calcium, they make up what's called a calcareous ooze. This next phylum includes phylum Coleophora, which includes the ciliates, again being heterotrophic protozoans. What distinguishes them is that they have many hair-like cilia that surround their bodies and help them move. Now most of these are freshwater. The most famous one is the paramecium. You may remember learning that in biology, but there are some marine species. Now, phylum Basilaria includes the diatoms, which are different. They're not protozoans, they're unicellular phytoplankton, so they're autotrophic. So this indeed is a type of algae. They have a unique cell wall called a frustule, which is made of silica, which is again that glass-like substance. They have some interesting photosynthetic pigments. They of course have chlorophyll A, which most autotrophs do. That is the main photosynthetic pigment that has the ability to absorb blue and red light. However, diatoms also have chlorophyll C, which acts as an accessory pigment to chlorophyll A, and also the pigment fucoxanthin, which is a carotene-based pigment that also helps out chlorophyll A by absorbing more blue light, but also green light and yellow light, which the chlorophylls do not absorb. Diatoms have some interesting reproductive strategies. They have an asexual form of reproduction where they simply divide very quickly and cause a bloom. This actually could be some of the reasons that cause certain types of red tide, because they reproduce so fast. But they can also do a sexual reproduction where an oxospore is formed. At the bottom of the page you can see that when a diatom reproduces, its frustule, or the cell wall, has to split, and you have two new cells that form. But notice one cell is the same size as the original parent cell, but the other cell is smaller because it's using the smaller half of the frustule. Well, the reason that this oxospore is formed during sexual reproduction is so that the cells don't get too small. They can go back to being an original size cell after several generations of this asexual reproduction. Phylum Dinoflagellata includes another group of marine algae. These are called the dinoflagellates. So again, they're unicellular phytoplankton, and they get their name from the fact that they have two flagella. In the pictures to the right, you can see that there are grooves running around the surface of the cells, and these grooves house the flagella. One goes around the organism and one sticks out through the sulcus. The cell wall is composed of armored plates made of cellulose, which is the fiber-like material found in plants. Notice there are usually two parts to a dinoflagellate's cell wall. The top part is called the epitheca, and the bottom part is called the hypotheca. The photosynthetic pigments in dinoflagellates again include chlorophyll A as the main photosynthetic pigment, again chlorophyll C as an accessory pigment, but they also include a pigment called paradenin, which again is a carotenoid-based pigment that is designed to help chlorophyll A absorb more light. Another type of unicellular algae can be seen in phylum Haptophyta, which includes the coccolithophores. The cell wall of these algae is embedded with calcium carbonate plates known as coccoliths, and you can see that example in the upper right hand corner of the slide. Now the first seaweed phylum that we're going to talk about is phylum Phaeophyta, which is the brown algae. Now one way I always remember that brown algae is in this phylum is I think of the Spanish word feo, which means ugly, and I think of a brown plant being kind of ugly and stuff. But oddly enough, brown algae actually are quite pretty because they're not completely brown. They're more like an olive green. So again, this is a multicellular creature, being a seaweed. All brown algae are marine, meaning they live in the ocean, and their photosynthetic pigments include chlorophyll A, and then also fucoxanthin, which is another type of carotenoid that helps out chlorophyll to absorb more light. And fucoxanthin is a brown yellowish pigment which, combined with the green pigment chlorophyll, helps make the brown algae kind of look like a yellowish to olive color.